Good afternoon. My name's Joseph Bathanti. Thanks for being here. Just wanted to say a few words about myself and the book I'm about to read from just before we get started. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the son of a union steelworker. A number of my poems are about that union steelworker, my dad, quite a few about my mother, a union seamstress. I'm the grandson of four immigrants, three from Italy and one from France. I'm the first person with my name to go to college. I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and after I got out of Pitt with a graduate degree in English, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had a very ponderously long list of things that I couldn't stomach the thought of doing. So I applied to be a Vista volunteer, Domestic Peace Corps, and was randomly assigned to the North Carolina Department of Correction. This is in 1976. I'd never been on a prison yard before, and that experience just simply dramatically redirected the agenda of my life. I ended up meeting my wife, Joan, not my wife then, but she was assigned to the same project. Once out of Vista, I needed to get a job and had no earthly idea what I was qualified to do. So I applied to be an English teacher at a community college in Charlotte and ended up getting the job there and ended up writing, which was a dream of mine, a pipe dream at the time. It seemed wholly unlikely, but I've been writing all these years after, about 50 years at this point. I currently live in right outside of Boone, North Carolina, in the Appalachian Mountains. I'm a recently retired English professor from Appalachian State University in Boone. And so I'm going to read a little bit from this latest book of poems that LSU has published called Steady Daylight. It takes me back and hopefully takes you into a new world, opens a portal into a world that is in many ways autobiographically, but I hope you'll permit me the imaginative license to do what poets and fiction writers do. They exaggerate and they stretch and they use hyperbole and any number of things to maybe expand and enhance their art. It takes the reader and me back to the little Italy that I grew up in Pittsburgh. It was called East Liberty. It's wholly vanished now, save from memory. It has been what we call gentrified at this point, but it is really where the seeds of my poetic store, and I write fiction too, were being planted long before I ever knew it. So I mentioned early that um, my mom and dad, a seamstress and a steelworker, have become really in a lot of ways the most fascinating characters in my life. If they were with us here today, they were humble working class folks that did everything for my sister and me so that there would be milk and bread on the table and shoes on our feet. If they were here, they would say there's nothing fascinating whatsoever about them. But I've found myself over the years writing rather obsessively. So the first poem that I want to read is about my mother. It's called Singer. Um, a refrain of my life was the sewing machine in our house. My mother was always sewing, even though she did that for a living as well. She made most of my sister's clothes, and that Singer sewing machine, which was like an icon in our house, I can see it. It's been passed down the family to my niece. Um, was always revving in many ways, perhaps my imagination revved with it. This poem is called Singer. A wedding gift from my father, my mother's sleek black Singer, stationed in the alcove on Prince Street. Bedded twilight in rooms a floor above. My sister and I listened to its steady thrum litany in lullaby as my mother spun the handwheel in fetid thread unraveling from its spool skewered on the spindle, spitting from the loaded bobbin another cartridge in reserve, such speed the Singer smoked. its golden Gothic signature scorched into its mysterious arm, therein secreted the shaft, pressure bar, faceplate. My mother paused for it to quell, checked its belt and feed dog, hand basted a cuff slit, and stitched another buttonhole, pinned fabric to a pattern, as if under a spell to clothe us new come dawn. The singer hovered, mid-tack, panting, then revved off again. My mother's long brown hair lifted in its wake. Past the night, long after Marie and I faded into dreams, she traveled the scarce trestle of morning, my father chained to a boom crane, building time on his sentence. At the threshold of the troposphere, stories over steel's open hearth, thimbled fingers skirting the throat plate, the needle but a micron from piercing her. And so I write quite a bit about steel and the steel industry. As I mentioned, my dad was a steel worker, and that industry, as I knew it as a kid in Pittsburgh, has long since vanished. So is so many people say memory is the mother of the muse, and I invest in it very significantly. And I know that I've mythologized this little place called East Liberty. Again, the last of one of the Little Italies in Pittsburgh. But I think of my childhood rather nostalgically, and this could be a nostalgia for a past that never existed. I think of it as a powerfully happy one. This next poem is called Chi-Chi's. Chi-Chi's was the corner store. And in this old neighborhood that I grew up in, East Liberty, my dad came from a family of seven children. My mother came from a family of seven children. And they all settled within, I swear, a 1 to 2 mile radius of one another. So you would cut through an alley, you were in your grandmother's house. You would cross the street, you were at your aunt's house. So it had a kind of beautiful provincial familiarity and sense of safety. Not to say that there weren't all sorts of social ills prevalent there. These were years of kind of unresolved racial tensions that I also write about as well. This poem's called Chi-Chi's. And it's where I bought penny candy and baseball cards and what we called pop back then. Sun spills through the lintel. The lone bulb sways on its wire above the scarred cash register, tacked with a crucifix, behind which Chi-Chi perches, Jimmy Durante's silent twin, mute, a living daguerreotype, gray cardigan, chipped horn buttons, striped morning pants, colossal ears and nose, snap brim fedora. Breath between his blue teeth trills in Italian. In a glass casket lay penny candy, jawbreakers, sugar daddy, Sputniks, kisses, Tootsie Rolls, Mary Jane's fireballs. Aquarial urns squat the counter, pickled eggs in pink brine, green dills the size of river carp. Chi-Chi spreads his arms, palms up, his way of asking what I desire, though I wonder what took his tongue. I arranged 3 pennies, Lincoln's profile from his mausoleum. The store smells of turned earth, the nobly smoke, the silence of aged paesani and their spectre escorts. In East Liberty, the dead like birds consort with the living. I suppose too there was a certain spookiness to living in this neighborhood. I had one grandparent, my grandmother, who was born in France, and educated in convents, who spoke English. I only knew my one grandmother, my French grandmother. My father's mother perished in childbirth, which was not unusual back in those days. But my two grandfathers only spoke Italian, and there were so many people in the neighborhood who only spoke Italian. So it was like wandering through this corridor almost of ghosts of old world people who still dressed very much like old world people and still had one foot in the old country, Italy, and one foot also in in the New World. So that was an amazing kind of experience too. And again, it helps, I think, writers mythologize their lives, which I think can be important. But in my case, it also created this really, really chiseled sense of place that I continued to mine. This next poem is called The Cellar, um, and it's kind of about our cellar. And I think it's self-explanatory. We had a kitchen wall phone with a very, very long cord, and when my sister and I um, wanted to engage in private conversations, basically when we started to date and talk to people romantically, we would snake this line all the way down the cellar steps and close the kitchen door and crimp the line in it. And my parents didn't like that. They never interrupted us, but they were very suspicious, especially once my sister started dating and was down there talking to boys. This is called The Cellar. When my sister talked to boys on the phone, she stretched the cord down the cellar stairs into the dark and whispered, "My parents didn't like her down there barefoot on cold concrete without a light talking to a boy. We had to pretend nothing at all odd about it. Supper on the table, sacramental supper, the sacred daily rite of our commingled lives interrupted. We couldn't even mention Marie in the cellar exchanging on the phone whatever it might have been at that moment with a nameless boy. Everything had to be as if it weren't happening. That was how one got through things. My parents would have punished me had they known what I was thinking. I was not at all curious about them, but I often wondered about Marie, 16, 1966, Johnson's first term after the assassination, the year I started remembering with dreadful precision. My father taught her to drive our blue Bel Air, riding shotgun. I adored that Chevy, my sister behind the wheel, windows down, her long hair blowing. I punched radio stations button to button, lashing music over us like I was typing her story as she sang from memory, and I mumbled. Without even realizing, she shaved the hairpin on Mellon Terrace while I held my breath and tried to get it all down with speed and truth before 1967 showed up and she left for college at Slippery Rock. I loved her secret life, living through all she yearned for alone, in the cellar with the coal furnace, copper pipes weaving in and out of the ancient rafters that held up our house, my father's tools, our sleds, shelves of empty jars, canned hams, fruit cocktails, statues, and crucifixes my mother thought a little much for upstairs. In her nightgown, mother washed clothes down there where my father shaved, our retreat when we craved solitude. In its very center, a drain that flowed to the city sewer, then the Allegheny, west on the Ohio, all the way to California. Marie ascended to us from the cellar, changed. All of us changed. What had she and that boy talked of? We made the sign of the cross, said grace, and ate supper. Next poem's called The Raccoon. In one sense, it's literally about a raccoon. We live in the country, and raccoons are not a rarity to show up. One day, a raccoon was at our front door. Um, when I left in the morning, something obviously wrong with it. Act showing up in the day, showing up at breakfast. Raccoons are nocturnal. I was wary of rabies, whatever it might have been, so I called animal control. But it's also about more than a raccoon, as all poems are. The raccoon, like an old Italian man, wobbling from too much wine. Lost on his way home from bocce, he strayed into our yard, confused, overdressed in black overcoat and banded gray fedora, the gamey smell of the Nobili cigars. When I opened the front door, he turned. He'd lost an eye a long time ago. He seemed to lift a hand, perhaps a very small vino. Sweating, clearly sick, he struggled to stand. I thought it rabies, but it was distemper, the animal control officer explained. Young, lovely. He apologized for what he had to do. The raccoon, tail soaked, lusterless, rings faded, had scrabbled into the basilico, shivering on the stone wall that grottoed, the weathered statue of the Madonna in a bed of Easter lilies abloom. The young man placed the cage in the shade of the dogwood. He was gentle with the snare pull. Out of kindness, he said, sometimes they can be cured. The raccoon watched fearlessly a station of the cross. When I was very little, my grandfather, compadre Paolo, ate Sunday dinner with us. He twirled his pasta against the soup spoon. The way he lifted his hand, more bread, more wine, but he used that hand as well for no more. Spatra, he'd growl, wait! His voice, iron, rust, bone on bone. What was he waiting for? He'd had enough. He wanted to disappear. The raccoon bowed, offered himself, surrendered to the halo. The next poem is called Right Guard, which is about my dad, who used exclusively Right Guard deodorant. Um, and that was a stretch for him because my dad wasn't someone to ever have a scent or cologne or jewelry or any of those adornments. Beautifully humble man, a um, lovely father. The only father I could have had. Again, this is called Right Guard, and I think it explains itself. As he aged, my father dwindled, not in stature, though he grew smaller as elders must, but rather in estate. He never required much, insisted on giving things away. What am I going to do with all this? Suddenly I had his watch, wristwatch, shirt, hammer and plane, his car keys and driver's license when the time came. I arrived the night of his death and stole a moment, alone in his room at the Pines, a name too green and pulsing, filled with trees, near infuriating for a tomb. My mother had died a year earlier. To save money to pass along to me and my sister, my father requested a move to an efficiency, a monk's cell. At heart, he was an ascetic. I sat on his bed where it perched that morning, September 3rd, his 59th wedding anniversary, my mother gone a year. He sat there too to quell his vertigo, hands folded, his dawn office before launching his day. He witnessed the first rind of Sabbath, sun crossed the sash, song, sparrows chanted Aspergus me. Then prepared, he rose. I stood and paced behind his shade, gauging where in his modest span between the bedclothes and coffee pot he decided to join my mother. Privately, no announcement, illness, death watch, no priest. The attention would have embarrassed him. His only flourish was the white pressed handkerchief on him at all times. Perhaps he glimpsed his fetch, or responsive to my mother's whims, her beckoning, or his own mother, whom at 5 had lost to childbirth, given neither to signs nor bodement, never mysterious, but like us all, that parsed life step by step. My father kept a secret life. He alone entered. Nothing terrible or even curious, a silent chamber. He had the wisdom, the courage, to leave locked, the key hidden, though he had little use for metaphor. A millwright, steelman, he discovered the ladled heat in molten pour, the union shop, a practice he abided and died for. What was there left of his to take? He'd already given me everything. I wandered into the tiny bathroom. Stationed on the shelf above the sink stood a can of Right Guard, the only deodorant my dad used. Original, of course, sport. The logo stick figure in full throttle bolting from the blocks. I grabbed it and pressed the actuator. The valve hissed and hung a familiar incensed mist. Out of it, like a genie summoned from its lamp, appeared my father. This next is called Pittsburgh Bakery in Winter. Into Prantles on Walnut Street through the sudden scrim of snow, an ancient white-haired couple hovers. Dusk of Pittsburgh, frigid winter, enough to freeze the rivers after hours of rare, exquisite sun, now vanished for another score of days, yet still firing in the icicles knifed from the bakery awning. The hours, the very old, a pair to fetch sweets, swathed in silver tissue, laid in white boxes, latched with string. The woman holds the man's arm. He wears a gold cap, she a gold scarf like a babushka about her head, their kind faces scrubbed clean by the 20th century. So small, they smile, so aged, almost frightening, they pluck numbers and enter the long queue. The bakery is warm, blinding, glass cases of cream puffs, eclairs, ladylocks, Napoleons, French donuts, meringue, the glory of unbridled desire, confections of the living. Next poem is called Excommunication. I grew up extra Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school, 1 through 8, and then all through high school at a all boys private Catholic all boys school in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh Central Catholic, which changed my life. My mother called it a private school for a private school for Catholic hoodlums. And I loved Central. I loved going there. Those teachers, those Christian brothers and the lay teachers put books in my hands and took me to films and encouraged me to keep my eye out on the Vietnam War because I went to high school between 67 and 71. It was a brilliant place to go, simply brilliant. And I got a beautiful education, 1 through 8. In grade school, I was taught by nuns. I'll have to contradict myself. I said earlier that I had kind of an idyllic, really happy childhood. I won't totally retract that, but the only bump in that otherwise happy childhood were the nuns, who I will diplomatically say only that they were extreme. And this poem's called Excommunication because I had you have to go to confession before you go to communion, and you were always nattered at about your sins and your soul and going to hell. And I was just hoping I'd make purgatory, but worried about hell. Although, to my parents' credit, we never talked about religion and Jesus and God at home, even though the house was festooned with all the usual iconography. So, this poem, Excommunication, recounts a time that I went to confession and got a tongue lashing from the priest. And they're not, it's all supposed to be anonymous, but don't believe that for a minute. Excommunication. Quarantined with Father Ott in his haunted box, I'm a fool to have trusted him with my cherished mortal sins. Hardly lost on me the royal irony that his Jesuit vows forbid a girl, anyone, anywhere. In his treble, God the Father, bass behind the cribble booms. You are in the power of Satan on the express to Hades. So thunderously the crazed Calabres widows, twisted in rosaries, loafing in the nave, nattering novenas, squibrilata in preparation for the second coming, fall into a frenzy of crossing themselves, then dash from the church to chain smoke in the Lenten blizzard. In labored softs like a bellows, odd fumes, impatient for me to thank him and get the hell out, he fiddles with his black Zippo, metallic creak of its hoisted hood, snap of its descent, then the scent of lighter fluid as he flicks the flywheel, and sparks from the flint afford enough light to make him out, inches from my face, through the confessional scrim, boozy, potato nose, fade, pooching lips, stench and shade of claret, magenta stool, white hair, slicked, licked as a possum, the cigarette for which he's famished, already knocked between his consecrated fingers. And I think I'll end with the title poem of the book, which is called Steady Daylight. And it imagines my father's 105th birthday in heaven. He died when he was 91, basically, as far as I'm concerned, to follow my mother that he missed so dreadfully, who had died about a year earlier. So this imagines with some hubris, maybe I'm even being sacrilegious. It imagines not only the party, but it imagines heaven as well. Steady daylight. Today in heaven, my father turned 105, finally working steady daylight. He's got it knocked. 8 to 4, double time and a half, no asbestos, no shoveling slag on the open hearth, no depending from a boom crane, 6 degrees and sleet, no boss, 13 weeks vacation annually, kingdom come. The union up here takes no shit. Home well before dark, traffic mellow, blue sky, nothing but green signals, plenty of time once home. Perfect parking spot right in front of the house to sit a minute, smoke a Camel, sip an Iron City Pony beneath the olive and lemon trees he planted when he first arrived, 368 days after my mother, to celebrate their 59th anniversary. Those trees grow well in heaven. Mild weather year-round like Puglia, save for snow on holy days and feasts. He shaves and showers in the cellar. My mother has his clothes for the party laid out on their bed, khakis, short sleeved summer white shirt. The party's at Aunt Lou's, everybody there at each stage of their lives concurrently. Another time this would have struck them as outlandish. Not now. They were poor. They suffered. Now they're happy. Money's not an issue. No one gets sick. No one gets hurt. The neighborhood's safe. Everyone gets along. At all times, they act reasonably. Light surrounds them. It's that kind of place. Angels from the ether bear platters of ravioli from Grosseria Italiano in Bloomfield, sausage from Joe Grasso in Larimer Avenue, lemon ice from Moyo's, fogliadells from Borsati, Parmesan aged for eternity, squingili from Umberto's clam house that Uncle Ralph scored from a Detroit crony, wine from the wedding feast at Canaan. My mother made the artichokes and baked my dad's favorite egg custard pie, every single candle, 105. Joe looks good, says my mother. Says my dad, give me a kiss, Rose. With no hesitation, she dips in, long brown hair, brown eyes, red lipstick, sassy 40s dress, halo, hovering like lilac. My dad's taken to rope sandals and straw fedora. They're movie stars. She sits on his lap. He looks at his watch. Tomorrow's another working day, he says and winks. They form a conga line and weave the rooms and halls up through the bedrooms into the attic singing Grandma's Lye Soap. Aunt Margaret deals blackjack at the big dining room table. All the food is still out, but they decide to cook again. Peppers and eggs, hot sausage, black velvet. The blonde in the black velvet dress and pearls on its label turns itself and trickles upside down into shot glasses. Chubby checker on the turntable, the kids doing the twist. Uncle Pippi starts with the Italian songs. Papa twirls Aunt Teresa in a tarantella, and suddenly winter it begins to snow. Here they are saying goodbye, time to go home, kissing, bundling babies, shackling chains to cars. My father helps his mother, Maria Cristina Bocchicchio, down the steep stone stairs to Leamington. He's not seen her since he was 5, 100 years, Cento. On his right arm, his hammer arm, is tattooed an American eagle, arrows in its beak, above which unfurls mother. He must have gotten it in the army. How could I have never asked? Angelo stands to his knees in snow and plays his lost violin. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for that, Joseph. That was wonderful. I'm still kind of reeling from that last poem. What you conjured there is really amazing. So
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you ended on that. But now I have to get back. I have to get back to earth here. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. In particular, I want to thank Richard Roof, tuning in from St. Paul. Thanks for being here, and Chris Arvidsson from Charlotte. Um, we got a couple comments that I want to share with you, Joseph. This one is from your Pittsburgh Bakery in Winter. Paul Lawson in the chat says, "Yay, Prantles from here in Pittsburgh. Our wedding cake and my birthday cake, they're burnt almond tort."
Wow. Yeah, I mean, Pranos was kind of an institution in my life. It's in a neighborhood called Shadyside. That's all those neighborhoods leak into one another. So Pranos was kind of another kind of a iconic place. And I teach in an MFA program every year in Pittsburgh at Carlow University. So I'm in Pittsburgh for 2 weeks every January, and I always go into Prandel's and get something. So I appreciate that Pittsburgh shout out.
We have a one more comment. I think it's about your last poem there from Paul as well, and I have to agree with him. He says, "No cookie table." Where was the cookie table in the poem? That's a really important question.
That's really funny, Paul. I should say nobody gets married in the poem, though. When I do part
Right.
two, there will be weddings, and of course there will be the cookie table.
I'm going to start here with a question in the chat from Chris here. Um, Chris says, "I love this book so much, I had to blow through it all at once. Tell us about how you chose the cover."
Oh, okay, great. Man, painstakingly, um, Chris, and that's Chris Arvidsson from Charlotte. Is that correct?
That's right. Uh-huh.
Hey, Chris. Yeah, Chris is a good friend, a fine poet. Um, well, I wanted once I determined the title, and it was an easy title to determine. Um, in steady daylight was something my dad would say sometimes. He's a steel worker. He worked turns, he worked shifts. Often he was gone. Steady daylight was kind of 8 to 5, and you could be kind of a normal guy. So you would hear like, man, I'm on steady daylight for the next 3 months. And we rejoice because I'd get to see my dad, and my mom. All of us felt that way. So when I wrote the poem, I knew that when this book actually took form, it would be called Steady Daylight. But I wanted to get an image of steel and sun on the cover, which is very difficult to do, because when I grew up, and even now, there's sort of an ordinance that the sun can only show up so many days in Pittsburgh, and and especially in the winter, it doesn't show up at all. So I just hunted, Chris. I hunted everywhere for images. I did a lot of research through University of Pittsburgh archives and City of Pittsburgh archives, and I found this amazing image done by a fellow named Huck Beard. who is a writer himself and is, I believe, the art director. Has a pretty solid job with Pittsburgh Magazine. So I wrote to Huck, gave him the usual, underscored my pedigree. I'm a Pittsburgh kid. I grew up in East Liberty. He's from Pittsburgh, and he really generously supplied the image. So that's where I found it. I found a lot of other really extraordinary photographs too, but this just sort of summed it all up. That's Carey Furnaces, which is now, which in its heyday was just producing a whole lot of steel. And I'm pretty sure. Let me look to make sure I'm saying this right. Yeah, in the photograph, the title of the photograph is called Sunlight. So
Can you show us the book cover?
I would love to show you. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. So yeah.
I want to start talking a little bit about the structure of the book because, we're looking at it right now. And I do want to remind everyone in the chat, just put a question and we'll ask Joseph. So I think I want to start by asking you, I'm not a poet, so kind of a poetry collection is always kind of confounding to me to begin with. I guess I kind of want to ask you how the book came together. Maybe was it disparate poems? Did you always have an idea of it? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The way I put poems together is, I don't typically have any rhyme or reason. I know that at some point I'm going to have a pile of poems that might be about this or might be about that. Yes, I'm a Pittsburgh poet, but I write about the American South where I've lived for the last 50 years too. So I don't deliberately say I'm going to build this book, but I write kind of obsessively about, again, about Pittsburgh, about steel, about my neighborhood, about my parents. So there's nothing mystical in my answer. Just bit by bit, the poems came together. And at some point I thought, haha, I have enough poems to put into a book and send off and see if I can get it published. And the earliest poems in the book, I probably some of these poems could be 15 years old. I'm not sure, but they weren't all recently, they definitely weren't recently composed. And then once you get them into a book manuscript, as everybody knows, then you fool around with them and you revise and just mess around with them. And then they take on an organic shape. And then there's um, the mysterious formula of how do you order the books? Are you going to have order the poems rather, or are you going to have sections, etc.? So that's the fine tuning that comes much later.
We got a couple comments in the chat here. This one is from Kim. Kim says, I still have a bottle of my dad's Aqua Velva Ice Blue that I open, and dad is right there, even after his death many years ago. Thank you for right guard.
Oh, Kim, that's lovely because I literally went into my dad's, his apartment in assisted li living and just wanted a moment to just hang out and I still have the right guard can that I took, what's left of it. And when I need a special boost, or if I don't know, if I just need, my dad, I'll use a little bit of right guard. And so my father, gosh, let's see, holy cow. Yeah, my dad will be gone like 20 years pretty soon, and I still have that right guard can. And so every time I smell it, it's like there's my dad. So
Chris in the chat says, that's Old Spice for her. And
ah,
I I want to talk a little bit. I guess I want to talk about memory, and I'm interested. I don't know how to put this because I don't like this question, but I'm interested in it, so I want to ask you anyway. I'm kind of interested in, when you're going to this place, right, and you're writing, this place that doesn't exist anymore, and I'm curious, um, how much sort of like fact, did have any, I don't like that word, but did you look things up ever? Was this kind of like, did you kind of rely on memory? Like, how did you kind of manage that, like your memory versus other people's memories?
Okay. I mean, it's a good question in the sense, I wholly imagine things. I like to think I have like an amazing memory. I think I have a really good memory, but as the great poet Rita Dove says, and I paraphrase her, memory is compassionately inaccurate. So I do have those memories, but I will say to y'all who write autobiographically, um, you can also do living research. My sister and I are very close, and she's 3, 4 years older than me. So I will call her and say, Marie, did this happen? And did that happen? But I also do research. Um, I think it's important to disabuse poets and fiction writers of that idea that we don't have to do research. We make everything up. I'm very interested in documentary precision. So if I'm writing about a particular strike in a particular year, I'll find out what year, what month that strike, what happened, what people were wearing at a certain time. Yeah, I do a lot of research. So the core is memory. The core is memory, but I find documentary details authenticate work in wonderful ways, and it's fascinating too.
So you're the author of novels, right? Poetry,
Mhm.
short story collections. Have you written a memoir?
I have a book of essays, kind of linked personal essays that came out, I think 2013, maybe right in around there, called Half of What I Say Is Meaningless from the John Lennon, from the Beatles song, Julia. And it's about 14 not linked, but 14 personal essays that are all memoirs, all self-contained. So, and I'm working on something else. I wouldn't want to write like an autobiography for God's sakes. I don't think. I mean, I worry that I've already said more than enough about myself. But I like to write about various episodes, things that are self-contained.
As a nonfiction writer, I really was kind of stunned by, as you put, kind of this precision of, that you were able to create here. I mean, at least that's how it felt as a reader. Like, obviously, I'm not from that place. I don't have a connection in that way, but it felt really precise in this way that I feel like I could really relate to.
Yeah, and sometimes for me, it's just more fun to write that way rather than to say, a dress, what kind of dress was it? And I became sort of very interested in the brands of neckties men were wearing back when my dad was courting my mother. And, California satins was a label. And I mean, you couldn't make up California satin. So it seems to me anytime you can get that language in a poem, you should do it. So, and again, research dishes up language to you that you couldn't make up in a million years. What is this thing called?
I'm gonna get to this question from Paul in the chat. Paul asks, how has your perspective on your family evolved over the decades, especially since your parents passed? Do you have your sister read your family poems before you release them to get her perspective?
Thank you, Paul. I do not have her do that at all, and that sounds like no way would I do that. But I just don't do it. I don't have anybody read my stuff, and that's not because I think I don't need that extra eye. I definitely do. I will check with Marie about precision because she's been around longer than I've been. My perspective, gracious, I mean, my parents were beautiful, wonderful, flawed humans like all of us. And the trick, of course, is when you write about people you love, like your parents, and if you're poets, you're going to get around to writing about your parents, is to not over sentimentalize them too. I mean, I really try to try to have some sort of moral baseline of truth there. Um, and but by the same token, there are things that I know that I don't write about them, that I just don't want to write about them, that or maybe I decided not to. Um, and I have to question my motives for why I would write anything unkind. But I think that as a fiction writer too, I'm able to take some sort of more imaginative leaps, insult into characters who might be sort of like my parents, flaws that from a documentary standpoint, in a conversation across the table with you, I wouldn't tell you. Um, so, and I'm still finding out things about them too, I mean, here's an interesting fact, my mother, my mother was Rosalind Mary, and she was born on May 30th. And when we died, we found out that her name was Maria Rosalina and her birthday was May 31st because we saw her birth certificate. So, and I can understand why she wanted a more American name during that period. She was born in 1919. She wanted to assimilate. They were immigrants. If you're on the planet right now, you see the hatred and avarice that is directed towards immigrants. So they wanted to assimilate, not call much attention to themselves. But we never knew that. We never, we just never knew that. And, we celebrated her birthday on May 30th every day, every year, and only found out later. And one thing, Paul, this is interesting. I'm beginning to do some fairly dramatic exploration into like family records and finding all sorts of things out, that no one had shared for whatever reason, whether that's language barrier, whether it's shame, whether it's scandal. And our generation is so much more, if you will, candid about everything than my parents were. They just never talked about themselves. You had to interview them. Um, so very humble people, but everyone has secrets.
That was a great question, Paul. Thanks for asking. And yeah, that your answer, Joseph, I could really relate to a lot of things in that, with kind of similar things in my family, which kind of makes me think, actually, I wanted to ask you, there's this sense of with some writers that being away from a place, it can be like can cause kind of an artistic inspiration, whether it's because you have to or because you want to be. I think about Christina Perry Rossi. She's like a Uruguayan writer, and she fled to Spain where she's lived for I don't know 50 years or something, and writes about kind of her home. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about do you if you think that possibly your output about Pittsburgh was kind of influenced in some ways from you not being there physically.
And I've heard that all my life too, Corey. I had to get away from wherever it was to write about wherever it was. Because I don't think that's the case with me because I write a whole lot about North Carolina too, and Appalachia and the Piedmont, and some of my, I don't know, half my books are about the South, I think. Um, I guess for me, when I was fun, okay, so I want to be a writer, whatever in the world a writer is. What am I going to write about? So I start writing about, like, I don't know, going to the moon and that kind of stuff, but I'd never been to the moon. So I could write two good moon sentences and then I was done for. And then when it came time to think about, okay, what do I know? I thought I know Pittsburgh. I know my family. I know East Liberty. I know sports. I know the Pirates. I know the Steelers. I know those kinds of things. I could authenticate those things and they were so in my memory. And I talked to my parents habitually on the telephone once I left and my sister, and we were in and out of Pittsburgh. We had kids, so we were up there for Thanksgiving all the time and birthdays. And I spend a little bit of time every year in the MFA program at Carlo in Pittsburgh, so I never got away from it, if that makes any sense. I never got away from it. I didn't feel like I needed to get away from it, although I ran from it as kids do. Once they graduate, I didn't want to hang around. Everybody's hanging around. I was like, I don't want to hang around. Hanging around is not a good idea, not for any particular reason, but I need to light out for the West, like Huck Finn. And so I moved geographically away, but psychically I moved, stayed, stayed there, you know. Ernest Gaines has a really interesting, speaks really interesting, Louisiana writer, of course, who talks about moving away from, I believe he grew up in Louisiana, moving away, but then hurrying back in his imagination when it came time to write about certain things. And I don't think that's unusual either.
I I appreciate you being here with us today, excuse me. And I've got two more questions for you.
Sure.
One of them is maybe a little indulgent, but I hope that you can indulge me. You were a scholar in residence for the Heinz History Center's Italian American program in Pittsburgh. And just because of that, I kind of wanted to ask you something that I think about a lot for myself, which is what does it mean to be like Italian American right now? Like I'm just kind of curious. I think about this a lot myself, so I wanted to know if you had any thoughts about it.
So right now at this very moment,
Sure, yeah,
Roy, yeah. And I can say this, one of the wells that opened for me, I grew up so provincially, I thought everybody was Italian, to tell you the truth. And it was an identity that I really clung to, and still do. But then I re realized that I really began to explore that in my writing after reading other Italian American writers. In fact, I read a book called Beyond the Godfather, came out in I think 1992, edited by Kenneth Congioli and Jay Perini. It was life-changing because there were all these people writing about all their experiences growing up Italian, really hotshot writers. And I thought, man, I have those experiences too. So it was the first time I think I identified as an Italian American writer. I think right now being an Italian American, and also we didn't call ourselves Italian Americans when I was growing up. We called ourselves Italians. It was before the world hyphenated.
right.
But I think right now, um, having real immigrant roots that I'm really proud of, very protective of, I think Italian Americans need to league and link arms with the immigrants who are being vilified so much in this country, for goodness sakes. Because when the Italians showed up, they were treated horribly. And before them, the Irish and the Polish and the Asian people. So I get a little sick to my stomach when I see an Italian person with an Italian name um, voting in ways that vilifies immigrants. So that's kind of my take on that. And one of the great Italian American scholars, his name's Anthony Tamburi. He's in the Calandra Institute in New York City. He's one of the great Italian American scholars, period. After 2001, and we had that massive vilification, Islamophobia towards Muslims, he wrote an essay called "We Were the Muslims," kind of saying, hey, y'all, this happened to us. Be careful, you know? So that's how I mean, I feel that way. I definitely feel that way. Um,
Yeah, thank you for that great answer and for indulging me with that question.
no,
Um,
I love indulging you, Corey.
we're gonna get to your question, Paul, and Chris, we're gonna end on your question, I think. So we got two more for you. Paul asks, have you written about the commonalities of your experiences in the Pennsylvania and North Carolina Appalachian foothills?
Trying to, Paul, that's a really tricky one to handle. A few years ago, a book called came out from Carnegie Mellon University Press. It was called, and I might be getting this wrong, Pittsburgh colon the Paris of the Appalachians, and I took some exception to that for two reasons. Pittsburgh's right next door to West Virginia, right next door to Wheeling. Um, it's not clear, in having lived in Appalachia now for 25 years, Appalachian folks don't say Pittsburgh is our Paris. And Pittsburgh people never claimed Appalachia, even though it is in that strand of geography that is labeled Appalachia. And I never realized how Appalachian Pittsburgh was until I lived in Appalachia and traveled back to Pittsburgh and began to really recognize the altitude and the elevation. And just as you get, what would it be? Just as you get southwest of Pittsburgh, you you're in Appalachian territory. And of course, steel and coal are kind of Siamese twins, if you will. Um, but nobody in Pittsburgh would have ever said we're Appalachian. So I have attempted. I wrote a book. I actually yeah, I've written some poems. My last book of poems from LSU is called Light at the Seam. It's all set in Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and is about mountaintop removal. Um, so I am trying to write about that, and I'm really interested in the Italian American presence that is in Appalachia. For instance, Clarksburg, West Virginia has a pretty big Italian American population. I might be saying the wrong town. I better be careful, but I think it's Clarksburg too that has one of the biggest Italian American festivals every year. So, and those folks came as masons. They came to do glass. It was that diaspora where the Southern Italians came to find work. So I am trying to very respectfully, really respectfully, um, sort of conflate those two experiences. But I want to be careful. I want to be really respectful of Appalachia. We've just, we've gone through Helene not long ago. We've had a number of things happen. There's a certain maybe perception about what Appalachia is in the rest of the country. So I want to traipse into that territory gingerly with complete respect.
We're gonna end the Q&A with this question from Chris, which is, what are you working on now?
Goodness, Chris. I'm a few years ago, gosh, a few years ago, 2001, I published my first novel called East Liberty, and I'm working on the a sequel to it. Although sequel bothers me in a way because it makes me think of movies, but I'm working on maybe book two of what I see as a trilogy, and then just kind of like as is my wont, wandering around, writing poems hither and yon, and um, I've been really interested in flash fiction recently too, just because it's short. It's nice to get things done. So yeah, and really enjoying all that kind of stuff.
Joseph, I really want to thank you so much for being with us here today. And I also want to thank everyone in the chat for joining us this afternoon. There's just a quick reminder that if you'd like to get Joseph's book and you don't have it yet, click the link in our chat and you can get a 40% off discount. Um, that's all we have for today. Joseph, is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
Just great gratitude, sending peace and gratitude to you and your families, and thanks for tuning in. And I do think poetry and stories save us in amazing ways. And thank you to LSU Press, the lovely folks, and in Corey for hosting this. It was just a wonderful experience.
All right. All right, guys, that's it. Until next time, thanks again.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.